A growing storm of suspicion has begun to engulf one of the most recognizable names in Christian broadcasting, and at the center of it lies a question no one in leadership seems willing to answer directly. What is really happening to Joni Lamb?
This sickness that Joni has may be the thing that God uses to bring her to repentance. All her money can't help her now. Doug is still lying about her condition. She has had health problems for at least 4 months. It is not just her back.
What started as a seemingly routine health update has spiraled into a full-blown crisis of credibility, exposing deeper tensions within the Daystar network and igniting a broader conversation about transparency, trust, and accountability in modern religious institutions. Pause for a moment to like, share, and subscribe to Saints and Scandals Report, as this makes us grow and we can bring to you more updates. Speculations surrounding Joni Lamb's health did not emerge overnight. Built gradually, fueled by inconsistencies, prolonged absence, and what many viewers describe as carefully worded but incomplete public statements. Initially, audiences were told her condition involved a relatively manageable back issue, something serious enough to require rest but not alarming. Yet as weeks turned into months, and her absence from broadcasts extended far beyond what seemed reasonable for such a diagnosis, viewers began to question whether they were being given the full story. Patterns began to form: repeated mentions of recovery without visible progress, vague updates lacking medical specificity, and a noticeable shift in how often her name was addressed on air. In an era where public figures often share detailed health updates, sometimes even too much, the lack of clarity felt unusual, even suspicious. For longtime supporters who had followed the network for decades, the silence was deafening. It wasn't simply curiosity driving the speculation. It was a sense that something didn't align, that the reality behind closed doors might be far more serious than what was being presented publicly. This growing skepticism found a focal point in Doug Weiss, a highly visible figure associated with the network during this period. Critics and viewers alike began accusing him of minimizing the severity of Lamb's condition, suggesting that his public statements were crafted to reassure rather than inform. While there is no verifiable evidence proving intentional deception, perception quickly became reality in the court of public opinion. In crises like this, tone and delivery matter as much as content, and many felt that the messaging lacked urgency, empathy, and transparency. Some observers noted that Weiss's explanation seemed overly simplified, reducing a complex and prolonged absence to a singular, manageable issue. Others argued that his role placed him in an impossible position, balancing privacy concerns with public expectation, but even those sympathetic to his situation acknowledged that the communication strategy was failing. In media history, similar moments have often hinged not on the severity of the issue itself, but on how it was communicated. From corporate scandals to political crises, the lesson is consistent. When the public senses that information is being filtered, trust begins to erode rapidly. That erosion of trust soon translated into visible frustration among viewers. Social media platforms, comment sections, and discussion forums became outlets for individuals expressing disappointment, confusion, and, in some cases, anger. For many, the issue wasn't simply about Joni Lamb's health. It was about the perceived dishonesty surrounding it. These were not casual viewers. They were donors, supporters, and loyal followers who had invested years of faith and financial support into the network. Their expectations were rooted in the belief that a Christian ministry should operate with a higher standard of honesty and openness. When those expectations appeared unmet, the emotional response was amplified. Words like betrayal, cover-up, and deception began appearing more frequently, reflecting a deeper sense of disillusionment. It is important to recognize that in faith-based communities, trust is not merely transactional. It is relational and spiritual. When that trust is shaken, the impact extends far beyond typical consumer dissatisfaction. It becomes a matter of moral and spiritual conflict. The critics of large ministries seized on the situation as further evidence of a long-standing concern. that some religious organizations operate with the same, or even greater, opacity as the corporate entities they often critique. Allegations of financial exploitation and manipulation resurfaced, with detractors arguing that the lack of transparency in Lamb's case mirrored broader patterns within the industry. These criticisms are not new. Over the decades, several high-profile televangelist scandals have shaped public perception, creating a backdrop against which any new controversy is immediately scrutinized. From financial misconduct to personal moral failures, the history of religious broadcasting includes numerous cautionary tales. In this context, the Daystar situation was not viewed in isolation. It was seen as part of a larger narrative about power, money, and accountability within modern ministries. Supporters of the network pushed back against these generalizations, emphasizing the positive impact of its programming and outreach efforts. However, the mere existence of such debates underscores the fragile nature of public trust in this space. As the official narrative continued to diverge from what many viewers believed they were observing, the gap between perception and reality widened. This disconnect proved particularly damaging. In communication theory, credibility is often described as the alignment between message and observable truth. When audiences feel that alignment is broken, skepticism becomes the default response. In this case, the absence of concrete details created a vacuum that speculation quickly filled. Rumors spread, theories multiplied, and each new piece of information, no matter how small, was analyzed for hidden meaning. The network's attempts to maintain control over the narrative may have inadvertently intensified the situation, as audiences interpreted restraint as concealment. It is a paradox frequently seen in crisis management. The more tightly information is controlled, the more uncontrollable the public reaction becomes. Compounding the issue was the noticeable silence from leadership. In times of uncertainty, people look to leaders for clarity and reassurance. When that leadership appears absent or unwilling to address concerns directly, it creates a sense of instability. For Daystar, this silence became one of the most significant factors driving suspicion. Questions began to emerge not only about Lamb's health, but about the internal dynamics of the organization itself. Who was making decisions? What discussions were happening behind the scenes? Was there disagreement among leadership? Without clear answers, speculation filled the void. This phenomenon is not unique to religious institutions. It occurs in corporations, governments, and nonprofits alike. However, in a faith-based context, the implications are particularly profound. Leadership is often associated with spiritual authority, and any perceived lack of integrity can have ripple effects across the entire community. As the situation evolved, it became clear that the crisis had moved beyond a simple health update. It had transformed into a broader examination of institutional trust and accountability. Viewers were no longer just asking about Joni Lamb, they were questioning the integrity of the organization as a whole. This shift marked a critical turning point. Health issues, while serious, are often temporary and personal. Trust issues, on the other hand, can have long-lasting consequences. Once credibility is compromised, rebuilding it requires sustained effort, transparency, and in many cases a willingness to acknowledge past mistakes. For Daystar, the challenge was no longer just about managing a narrative. It was about restoring confidence in its leadership and mission. Critics warned that the implications of this controversy extended far beyond the network itself. In an increasingly interconnected world, the actions of one high-profile ministry can influence perceptions of Christianity as a whole. Non-believers and skeptics often view such situations as confirmation of their doubts, reinforcing narratives about hypocrisy and lack of accountability within religious institutions. This broader impact adds another layer of complexity to the crisis. It is not just about internal trust, it is about external reputation. For many believers, this is perhaps the most concerning aspect of the situation. The idea that a lack of transparency could undermine the credibility of the faith itself is deeply troubling. It highlights the responsibility that comes with leadership in a public, faith-based organization, a responsibility that extends beyond organizational boundaries. Despite the growing tension, one of the most striking aspects of the situation has been the response of faithful supporters. While some have expressed frustration and criticism, others have turned to prayer, interpreting the events through a spiritual lens. For these individuals, the crisis is not merely a matter of organizational failure. It is a moment of reflection, a potential call to repentance, or even a form of divine intervention. This perspective reflects a deeply ingrained aspect of faith communities, the tendency to seek meaning and purpose in difficult circumstances. Rather than abandoning their beliefs, many supporters have doubled down on them, organizing prayer chains and expressing hope for both healing and truth. This dual response, criticism alongside continued faith, illustrates the complexity of the situation. It is not a simple narrative of disillusionment, it is a multifaceted story of struggle, belief, and resilience. At the same time, practical questions about leadership and direction have become increasingly urgent. With Joni Lamb absent, attention has turned to those currently steering the organization. Observers are asking who holds decision-making authority, how strategic choices are being made, and what the future holds for the network. These questions are not merely speculative, they are fundamental to the organization's stability. Leadership transitions, whether temporary or permanent, require clear communication and defined structures. Without them, uncertainty can quickly escalate into chaos. For Daystar, addressing these concerns will be essential not only for resolving the current crisis but for ensuring long-term sustainability. In the end, this unfolding situation serves as a powerful reminder of the importance of transparency, especially within institutions that rely heavily on trust and moral authority. Demonstrates how quickly perceived dishonesty can escalate into a broader crisis, affecting not only internal relationships but also public perception on a global scale. It highlights the unique challenges faced by religious organizations in balancing privacy, leadership responsibility, and public accountability. And perhaps most importantly, it underscores the resilience of faith communities, which continue to seek meaning, hope, and truth even in the midst of uncertainty. As the story continues to develop, one thing remains clear: the demand for transparency will not fade. Whether through direct communication, structural changes, or a renewed commitment to openness, the path forward will require decisive action. Until then, the questions will persist, the speculation will continue, and the broader conversation about trust and accountability in religious leadership will remain as relevant as ever. If you want to stay informed as this situation evolves, consider subscribing for future updates.